Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. First off, before we dive into today's 3 top stories in the viewer question, I would like to announce that for the very first time I will be live tweeting an awards show, and that will be the Golden Globes. I'll do the same with the Oscars later this year on February 22nd, but this Sunday I hope you'll join me online on Twitter to discuss the awards show as it unfolds. And I'll of course recap it on Monday morning, but still, I think it will be fun to discuss it live. And hopefully we'll have some surprises. And there was kind of like a pre-surprise this morning as the BAFTA nominations came out. There were some interesting snubs. Timothy Spall for Mr. Turner continues to be shut out of all the major awards shows despite winning at Cannes. But then also Selma, Unbroken, and A Most Violent Year all were shut out. Although, I don't know why everyone's surprised about A Most Violent Year. I mean, it's got some awards traction, but it's by no means a front-runner. But the really interesting thing was that Grand Budapest Hotel led the nominations with 11. And that's not only, not a really serious, important film, but it came out a long time ago in terms of, the memory of awards voters. So the fact that BAFTA just went crazy over that movie is very interesting and perhaps could signal how the Hollywood Foreign Press Association feels. And also, it's a good sign for Wes Anderson, who there's rumors that he might be making an Oliver Twist movie, perhaps as a follow-up. And if there's one thing that could make him love the British even more in a Charles Dickens story, it would be major wins at the BAFTA nominations. And this is just a gift in general because this gives him huge momentum going into the Oscars. I'm sure they've already decided the Golden Globe winners, but and the Oscar votes are in for the nominations, but I think that'll be very helpful with maybe securing him a win or more wins that he originally would have gotten for the Grand Budapest Hotel, which, by the way, of course, was on my top 10 list of the year, and it didn't make your top 10 list in the audience vote, but it was in the top 25. All right, so let's move on to the 3 stories of the day, and we're going to start off with another awards-related story, and that's Legendary, very interestingly, is going to gamble and hope that they can get 2 award-winning actors, preferably Oscar winners, for their upcoming Skull Island on the cheap. And the way you do that is you sign those actors before they actually win the awards, and you just hope that they do. I mean, I think that this cast sounds pretty good anyway, regardless, but still, if they go home with the gold on February 22nd, and that's the real gold that matters. The other gold's okay, like the Golden Globes, but you really want that Oscar win. But if these actors do win, and I think Legendary, this is a pretty solid bet. I wouldn't say safe bet, because this is a very tight race this year in pretty much all the categories. But I think it's a solid bet that J.K. Simmons will win an Oscar for Best Supporting for Whiplash, and that also it looks like they want Michael Keaton, who is a frontrunner to win Best Actor for Birdman. Yes, it was announced the other day. This is a story, I think, from the day before, picking it up now, and that's that Michael Keaton is in early talks. I'm sure they'll want to end these talks, though, before the Oscars, preferably, I'm sure, before the Golden Globes, when he might very likely walk away from with Best Actor, Musical, or Comedy on Sunday, but they would like to have him join the cast with, again, J.K. Simmons, who's already signed, and, of course, Tom Hiddleston, a.k.a. Loki. I think this is great on the one hand because I'm a big Michael Keaton fan. I've really been a fan of the Michael Keaton comeback way back when it started with him voicing Ken in Toy Story 3. He was brilliant in that role. I thought he was really, really good. He brought something really unique to it, even though it was just voice work, but he was really excellent. I've liked him in other films that he's done recently. I thought he was pretty good in RoboCop as, the evil corporate guy. Then, of course, he was also in Need for Speed. I thought he was very good in that. I liked Need for Speed. And then, of course, I love Birdman. It's my favorite film of the year. And many of your favorite films as well. And it did make, overall, number 10 on your top 10 movies of the year audience vote. That video went up yesterday. I hope you'll check it out if you have not done so already. So I think that's great for Michael Keaton that he would be on board for such a big movie. Now, where is this not so great? Now, on the one hand, it's not so great for Tim Burton, because it looks like making Beetlejuice 2 is not a top priority for Michael Keaton, and I think he just wants to get on board some other big projects before I think he gambles so strongly. I mean, I guess Legendary will take a gamble, but Michael Keaton feels that Beetlejuice 2 is a little bit too much of a gamble for his career. He is just on the cusp of a comeback. I don't think it's solidified yet, and I think that it would be unusual for him to carry a film. I think it's smart, actually, though, for him to jump on a big property where Legendary's name is going to help carry it. And of course, you've got the whole King Kong origin story kind of situation going on here. You know, it's Skull Island or Kong Skull Island. As I said before, that's very hard to say. And then, of course, you have Loki, Tom Hiddleston in the project, very popular with fans of all genders, but you know, for very romantic reasons. On a side note, I was checking out Robert Downey Jr.'s Twitter feed for some reason the other day, or actually I think it was his Facebook feed, and he said, "Don't Google yourself, kids." And there was some fan art that was really, really realistic of him, you know, with Loki about to have his way with Tony Stark, who was tied up in like kind of a bondage scenario. It was weird, but yet you had to really tip your hat to the artist because it looked like an actual photo. But anyway, I digress. Tom Hiddleston, he's got fans. And now, of course, it looks like J.K. Simmons, who also has a lot of fans, especially from Legend of Korra, but all of his supporting work over the years. And now, Michael Keaton. That'll be great as well. I think that'll be a good cast of people. I mean, at the end of the day, it could fail. You know, none of these people have been tested carrying a film yet. But I think, you know, it's a very strong, that's another strong bet. Now, the other thing that I think this is weird, besides, you know, really delaying Beetlejuice 2, is that I think it's very ironic that after what Birdman was about as a movie, which is about art and not relying on these big blockbuster films, that Michael Keaton would turn right around, take the success of Birdman to go basically kind of make another Birdman movie. I think that if there's a Birdman 2, I think it should feature Regan Thompson deciding to go and make maybe not a Birdman film, another Birdman film within the world of the movie, but another similar type of project, and maybe seeing how that goes on that set. And you can do one long take on a movie set instead of in a theater, you know, the actual physical theater. Great movie, by the way. If you've not seen Birdman, go see it. So I'm curious what you think of Michael Keaton being up for a role in Skull Island. Do you think that he and Tom Hiddleston and J.K. Simmons are a good team, or do you think they're a little light on star power in terms of a leading man? Because none of them have had that role. And also, what do you think of Michael Keaton taking such a role after kind of rallying against that type of movie in Birdman? All right, so that's the first story of the day. The second story of the day, we're going to kind of segue into another strong awards contender, Into the Woods. Didn't do so hot in the BAFTA nominations, but it's very highly nominated for the Golden Globes and could very well walk away with some wins on Sunday night. But Into the Woods, of course, very successful, not incredibly successful, but very successful, about to cross 100 million if it has not already in just a little over 2 weeks. So that's very good, especially for a musical that most people aren't familiar with. But there's a musical that people are familiar with that is really trying to get to the silver screen as fast as it possibly can, and that's Wicked. And the reason it's in the news is that the producers got out there and they said, look, we know there's a big demand for Wicked. We know the clock is ticking. We know musicals are coming out left and right, and they're aiming for 2016. That seems a little ambitious to me. They would have to begin shooting extremely soon, and it doesn't seem to me like they even have a green light. So I would think more 2017, 2018 is more realistic, but the producer kind of, gave himself a little bit of a safety net there by saying, well, at the end of the day, let's remember that it took 27 years to get Into the Woods to the silver screen and 30 for Les Mis, and those turned out great. But I would say, Wicked's been on Broadway for a long enough time that it's one of the longest running shows ever on Broadway. And I think that, you don't know how long this love affair with the comeback of the musical. I think we're on our second round of the comeback for the musical. Chicago was made quite some time ago, and Moulin Rouge, which really started this whole thing. And so I think that, the musical, as I talked about for Into the Woods, there have been more misses than hits at the box office when it comes to musicals. But I think Wicked has the potential to be a huge hit. It is, of course, as I said again, one of the longest running shows ever on Broadway, and it was so successful and such a phenomenon culturally that it launched 2 careers. Now, they're not huge careers, and one needed a second win from Disney, but I think everyone's familiar with Kristen Chenoweth, who originated the role of Glinda the Good Witch, and then, of course, Idina Menzel originated the role of the Wicked Witch in her pre-Wicked Witch days. This is an origin story. Think Monsters University, but with the Wizard of Oz, where these 2 witches meet up, and I guess at Witches College, and how I think her name is, let me see, I wrote it down here, Elphaba becomes the Wicked Witch of the West, or evil, and what happens to her. So Idina Menzel, of course, went on to Frozen, and I think that her fame in the musical theater world helped fuel the initial interest around Frozen and led to Frozen's success. So I think that a Wicked musical could have Frozen levels of success if done really, really well. And I would very much tell them they should go see what Idina Menzel is doing, because no one, especially Disney, is really utilizing her, which I find very odd. I mean, she is working, I believe, on If Then on Broadway still, but I just can't believe that no one has signed her for anything off of Frozen, although she should stop missing notes and performances as she did on New Year's Eve in Times Square so infamously, if she wants to make sure she gets another gig. But Wicked, I think this could be very successful. They are working on the screen adaptation right now. The same woman who wrote the book for the musical, I have her name here. It is Winnie Holzman. She's working on the screenplay as we speak. But I also want to, just for a moment, address Stephen Schwartz. He's the lyricist and the composer behind Wicked. He has not had any of his musicals, except for Godspell, adapted to the big screen. And Godspell really didn't make much of a splash. You know, it just was adapted, and that's about it. But he's had quite a bit of success in animation. Disney used him with Pocahontas as a lyricist. Very good. I really like the soundtrack for Pocahontas. And even though I'm not a fan, I know a number of you really like The Hunchback of Notre Dame. That, of course, is Stephen Schwartz's work as well. He also did the music for Enchanted. I thought that was really not really anything to write home about. But DreamWorks has also utilized him for The Prince of Egypt, and I thought The Prince of Egypt had a fantastic soundtrack as well. By the way, I just watched that on Netflix. It's available on Netflix recently, and I really, really enjoyed it. So if you're looking for something to watch, you can't go wrong with The Prince of Egypt. And DreamWorks Animation is going to be utilizing him in the near future to do the lyrics for their upcoming Bollywood-inspired picture, I believe Mumbai musical. So Stephen Schwartz, he has somewhat of a success rate that can be referenced, as well as, you know, you can just point to the fact that Wicked is one of the most successful and beloved musicals of all time, and it's a recent one, which I think would also be very refreshing. But yeah, again, these people need to get this thing going, and I just wonder, how long do you think they can wait? Do you think they can wait almost 3 decades, as did Into the Woods and Les Mis, or do you think that the musical is going to go away eventually? All right, so that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day is this little rumor that's going around, and we'll see if it's true, but this seems like the best rumor I've heard yet about a potential Batman v Superman teaser trailer finding its way to theaters. And that's that it will play in front of Jupiter Ascending, and it will only play in front of Jupiter Ascending, and if you want to see it, you have to see Jupiter Ascending. Now, this makes a lot of sense to me because Warner Brothers spent a lot of money on Jupiter Ascending. It's a Wachowski brothers movie. They have a good relationship with them, or at least did. They have, let's just say, maybe not a good, but a rich and long history with the Wachowski brothers. Of course, because it's the Matrix trilogy that was a huge, huge hit for Warner Brothers, especially early on in this whole franchise, you know, sci-fi comic book business market. So they have Jupiter Ascending. They delayed it significantly. It was supposed to come out during the summer. It's coming out now, February, early February. And so they're like, you know, how can we get people to go and see this movie? And I think this is a very good way to do it. It'll be interesting. You know, Star Wars for a while, of course, Episode 7, and for a very brief while, said, oh, if you want to see this trailer, you have to go find a theater. And everyone was like, that's ridiculous. I want to see this. There was a huge uproar because it was only going to play in a few theaters across the country. So, of course, they released it online, and the whole see it in the theater thing kind of died down rather quickly. So I'm really curious to see if Warner Brothers can successfully launch a trailer only in theaters. And they have some success rate with this. As you might recall, the Interstellar trailers kept dropping, you know, in front of movies that were as a surprise. And I remember going to see a film and being like, having the Interstellar trailer play and be like, why isn't this online? And just being really genuinely surprised, because the way you do it now is you release trailers online first. Although I would caution Warner Brothers, of course they weren't behind the Interstellar ad campaign that was largely run, I believe, by Paramount, but still, that didn't work out so well for Interstellar at the end. You can blame the movie maybe, or the mysterious ad campaign itself, but you know, you want to go for super saturation so you can get as many people into the theater as possible and convince them to go and see your movie. But again, they need to get people to go and see Jupiter Ascending. So they could very well tie the Batman v Superman trailer to that film and then release it online on Monday. I mean, there will be pirated copies going up for sure, but Warner Brothers will take those down, of course, you know, on YouTube and the internet in general. The studios have gotten quite good at that. And, of course, everybody will want to see the trailer in all its glory instead of a bootleg copy. But I'm curious, do you think this is a good idea, or do you think you wouldn't associate? Do you think this is a bad introduction to be associated with Jupiter Ascending, considering the fact people are so iffy on Batman v Superman to begin with. You're like, let's only associate it with really high quality content. But then again, maybe we'll be wonderfully surprised and Jupiter Ascending is a great film. We'll see what happens. And interestingly, that film has other repercussions for the comic book community because Gambit is going to be played by Channing Tatum, and this is going to be our first look at him in this type of role. He won't have little pointy ears as Gambit, but he'll have, I think, other physical elements like the black eyes with the red pupils, and we'll see if he has that face mask. Difficult things to pull off, but Channing Tatum is really game. He's a really professional individual. I got the chance to sit in a press conference with him in the Book of Life. You can check that out if you haven't seen it. And I think he's a surprisingly down-to-earth, grounded, serious person about his work and his craft, and the business side of things as well. Very refreshing and nice to see. So we'll see what happens, and I suspect that this will just be the Comic-Con footage if they do release anything at all. But I'd like to see it in all its glory, and I would certainly be very interested, as I think everybody else would. All right, so those are the 3 stories of the day. Now on to the viewer question, which comes from TechSpec, and this was actually endorsed by another BTT viewer, Jesse the Good Witch, as a good question for Morning Movie News. So, TechSpec asked this about yesterday's story that Game of Thrones is heading to IMAX theaters to re-release 2 episodes from Season 4, and they are potentially testing the waters for a feature film. So TechSpec said, Grace, you've said more than once that a movie should not have homework. Don't you think that a Game of Thrones movie would have a tremendous amount of homework? Especially because, on a side note, as I noted yesterday, they're thinking of releasing the film at the end of Season 7. So TechSpec continues saying, it's a real commitment to watch a series like this from the beginning. Also, what would that mean for the financial prospects of the movie if the average moviegoer hasn't watched Game of Thrones? Very interesting question, TechSpec, and I do strongly believe to this day that a movie shouldn't involve homework. So there are a couple workarounds to this, and in some aspects I also think where this makes Game of Thrones a unique situation where they might be able to overcome the homework scenario. So what is the quick fix? Well, I think they could have some kind of B storyline, or maybe like a very light A storyline, which is fresh for the film. Maybe introduce a new character who runs into all of our old friends, so they're kind of like they represent the moviegoer who is not watching Game of Thrones. So you could do that kind of an element. But the reason that this is a real problem is that while it would be ideal, of course, to make a movie that your non-Game of Thrones watcher could view, big reveals and payoffs are such a big part of the Game of Thrones viewing experience, as I think they are for any long-running television show, particularly today with the kind of quality that you have going on and also the continuous storytelling. Gone are the days of standalone episodes, that I don't think that a movie would satisfy the core fan base, which is quite large at this point for Game of Thrones, if it didn't continue storylines and have reveals. So there might be no getting around that, with the exception of the patchwork job of a new character who kind of takes the place for the new members in the audience. However, that's very risky on the other hand, because it could get very frustrating for frequent viewers, being like, I don't want to deal with this recapping, I just want to get right into it because I've been waiting for a movie for 7 years. So why do I think that this potentially could be a situation where this isn't a problem for the Game of Thrones movie, where, in other scenarios it is. People don't go back and read the books. I know many of you get frustrated with me for not doing that. You're like, why don't you read the books before this movie comes out? And I'm like, I don't have that much time. And as I always say, a movie shouldn't have any homework. I should be able to just walk in and view it. Now, if Game of Thrones is just a really good movie with great dialogue, great special effects, and great sets, that'll have some enjoyment factor for people, even if they aren't totally aware of what's going on in terms of the backstory. And they could totally go and be inspired to go watch the old Game of Thrones episodes, perhaps. And that could also be a big win for HBO. They could sense the hype for the movie that's coming up and maybe binge watch all 7 seasons. There's only like 13 hours per season or so. So, I think it's doable if you give people enough advanced warning, being like, you know what, you've got a year or maybe a year and a half, start watching now. And also, in addition, they could have maybe just a storyline that's encapsulated by the movie, and maybe that's another workaround besides a new character. You could do it that way, where it's like, well, at least the storyline that we're going on here in the A storyline, begins from begins in the movie and it ends in the movie. Although some of you even wrote yesterday you'd like to see a trilogy of films like Lord of the Rings from Game of Thrones. That it becomes a long-running story just jumping to the bigger screen. I think that would be a very good idea and something that I would recommend that HBO do. I think they should tell a complete story in a Game of Thrones movie, but they should definitely set it up for a sequel because I believe fans will demand it. So that's something that could be good, and that this continues beyond the first movie. So it gives an impetus to go back and maybe watch the first 7 seasons because, you know, there isn't just one movie and, okay, now you're done. It's like, no, there would be more movies. You really need to catch up now. Now, another thing that HBO could do is they could release a primer. They could, you know, just have like an hour-long or kind of like even a 2-hour-long special that they have available on HBO, or even make it available online to everybody, where, you know, you go and you watch, you get caught up on the 7 seasons. I think you could conceivably do it in 2 hours. Have one of the Game of Thrones actors host it, or have it be hosted by the creators of the show, also George R.R. Martin. Have them come in there and fill everybody in. I think you could do it pretty convincingly, and to at least a point where people could enjoy the movie. Then finally, this is what I think is most likely going to happen. I think they're just going to go about making a movie as they would if they were going to make a super long episode, just with a bigger budget and raising the stakes because it's going to be on the big screen. And I think what's going to happen is that there's a large enough group of people who do watch Game of Thrones, either legally or illegally. Remember, it's continuously the most pirated show out there. So many people do watch the show that it's enough to drive the opening weekends of the film. And then, at that point, everybody else will see just what a cultural phenomenon this is and how popular Game of Thrones is, and they'll be like, you know what? I gotta go and see it. I think we saw that happen with Avatar, and we saw it also happen with Gravity. There were huge lines for both those films long after they were released, you know, into the new year. They both were December or November releases, basically, I believe. I think Gravity came out. Gravity might have actually been an October release, as I recall. But people were watching that all the way into December, and that's really, really amazing. And all the way through award season. And not just people were trickling in, there were crowds. And I think that that's what could happen with Game of Thrones. The people are like, they'll go to see something else, and they'll look over and be like, what's that ginormous line for? And someone will say, that's for Game of Thrones. And they're like, you know what? I should see that. And I think that's their best bet over at HBO, to just, you know, swing for the fences, just completely blow the minds of every Game of Thrones fan, and then that hype, that reaction that comes from having our minds blown, because I'm a big Game of Thrones fan, will entice newbies to join the group. The bandwagon effect, so to speak. So that's my answer to your question, TechServe. I hope you liked my answer. Also, thank you, Jessie the Good Witch, for nominating a question. And everybody else, I hope you enjoyed and thought that was a good pick as well. So write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question. And then also, on Monday, there'll be no morning movie news because I'll be doing a Golden Globes recap over on the main Beyond the Trailer channel. So be sure to join me on Twitter on Sunday night. I believe the show, the red carpet, starts at 7 p.m., but 8 p.m. is when the actual Golden Globes start, Eastern Standard Time. And I'll see you online. All right.